Hi, and good afternoon, all. Good afternoon from Singapore. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Saifuddin Faridi, and on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, I would like to welcome you all to the ISAS International Conference on South Asia 2023. We have reached the final roundtable of the conference, and this session is titled Stately Bodies in South Asia, and we are thrilled to have with us Dr. Shahana Ghosh, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences here at the National University of Singapore, and Dr. Sneha Annavarapu, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the National University of Singapore and Assistant Professor of Urban Studies at the Yale NUS College. I will, before I hand over the session to Dr. Amitendu Palit, I will quickly remind the audience that the Q&A function will be open throughout the session, and you can pose any questions that you may have during that. So I'll now hand over the session to Dr. Palit.
Thank you so much, Said, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all the participants of this session. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the last roundtable of the ISAS annual conference, and it's been going on well, and we are very happy to have wholesome participation of interested people from all parts of the world. Today's roundtable, as Said mentioned, is on the subject of stately bodies in South Asia. And for those of you who have had the time to take a look at the conference handout that was sent out, you would note that this is a very interesting and somewhat less discussed aspect of social exploration that we are going to discuss at length today with very competent and distinguished experts on the panel. So just to let you into the discussion, the way this idea was constructed for the roundtable is to look at the South Asian states and their relationship with their citizens. So this across South Asia is certainly not homogeneous. This has a variation in its reflections and manifestations. And these variations give rise to the question that by what extents are states governing the body, and in what ways are the people strictly not governable or ungovernable. I guess these boundaries are getting a bit blurred under many circumstances that we are getting now, and perhaps the question of how far the stately bodies should step into governing citizens is becoming an important point of discussion. And this panel, in that context, is going to touch upon a few important issues. The first of this is what are the laws and legal regulations and other state measures that, say, for example, govern the consumption of food in various South Asian states. And as we all know, food security is an extremely important citizen concern for the whole of the South Asian region. Similarly, how are norms of gender and sexuality being governed by state interventions, which is another very complex but very thoroughly and very widely discussed subject that has come up in the recent narrative. And finally, how does the state govern and discipline labor? Again, another subject which has assumed tremendous importance at a point in time when labor markets in the South Asian region, much as keeping in trend with the rest of the world, are becoming heavily digitalized. And the role of the gig economy and platform workers are expanding very rapidly. And finally, I think it's always important to look at the other side, that when states govern their subjects, we look at things sometimes from the perspective of the states and raise questions accordingly. But how do people look at being governed? How does the public look at being governed? And what are their reactions in that respect? And there are protests. South Asia is no stranger to protests. It's one of the most vibrant and active regions of the world as far as anti-establishment protests are concerned. And what kind of protests have been witnessed in recent years? So I think we are in for a very rich, very informative 1.5 hours ahead of us. And let me not take any further time of yours. Can I request Dr. Sahana Ghosh, please, to start with the presentation? Sahana, over to you.
Sure. Thank you to ISAS for the invitation, and to Saeed and Dr. Pilot for organizing and hosting this session. It's a pleasure to be here in conversation with my colleague, Dr. Ungovernable. So I don't have, I'm going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. And the topic of my remarks today is policing in the Bangladesh-India borderlands. And my talk, I do apologize. I don't know if it's super noisy. Is it super noisy? There's some very hectic grass mowing just outside my door. Okay, so the topic of my presentation today is the policing of young men in the India-Bangladesh borderlands. And I will speak of both the Indian and the Bangladeshi state. What I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about my just very newly published book. It gives me great pleasure to hold it up. It's called 1,000 Tiny Cuts, Mobility and Security Across the Bangladesh-India Borderlands. It came out last month. And South Asia edition with Yoda Press is forthcoming in February. So that will be priced and widely distributed for the Indian market. So what I'll do is I'll just give a very quick overview of of the book and my kind of larger goals in this project, and then talk specifically about gendered policing and the making of threats, mobilities as threats, and in relation to national security in the borderlands that India and Bangladesh share. And then I'll go into a couple of examples of the kind of policing, the kind of targeting of particularly gendered bodies that I want to speak about today, and how that targeting of particularly gendered bodies and is it very, I can hardly hear myself. It's still fine? Sneha, is it super loud? Okay, great. So one, I'll talk a bit, talk through a couple examples of the kind of figures and heteronormative norms through which both Indian and Bangladeshi security regimes at the border and in the borderlands target young male bodies, and the kind of way in which, and the sort of second point I will try to, elaborate on as I talk, is the way in which this policing in the borderlands genders the states themselves, right? So the states of India and Bangladesh come to be embodied and gendered in a very particular way in relation to one another through these. And so those are the two sort of strands of my remarks today. So just to begin with, my book is an ethnography of militarized bordering in what is insistently South Asia's friendly border, right? So India and Bangladesh both insist that this is a friendly border, in contrast to the hostile, closed, live conflict-ridden India-Pakistan border. That discourse notwithstanding, that the reality is far from the case, that's far from the case. India has been militarizing its side of the border by building a fence since the late 1980s, and over the last 2 decades especially, there's been an increasing presence of security forces and all kinds of architectures and structures of security along its side of the border. And while that is not matched in volume and density by the Bangladeshi security forces, the BGB on the Bangladesh side, there is of course a significant presence. And what the book traces is the transformation of the book is empirically located in northern Bengal, in what was the former princely state of Kuch Bihar. And what the book traces through historical ethnography, is the transformation of this kind of formally connected region, connected in several different ways, connected through agrarian commerce, through trade, through kinship relations, through labor relations, and of course colonial infrastructures of road and rail connections. And the book traces how through post-colonial bordering from 47 onwards, there has been a kind of accumulating and expanding disconnection, severance of ties of all kinds, as this region comes to be produced as national borderlands of India and Bangladesh, right? So what we now, what we sort of commonly, popularly associate as remote, underdeveloped borderlands, at different locations along this over 4,000 kilometer long border, I try to suggest, I show through the book, is a kind of product of long historical processes, right? So borderlands don't just appear where borders are drawn, but they're produced through these long kind of historical processes of what I call cutting of time, space, imaginaries, and relationships. And in particular, what what the book does is it traces the development of India's and Bangladesh's border and mobility regimes in relation to one another. So the story of bordering I tell, I don't take the border to be a fixed thing in the fence or in its, in the geophysical line, but I take bordering to be this active and ongoing process, right? We're not simply living out the consequences of a border drawn in 1947 and redrawn in 1971 with the liberation of Bangladesh from Pakistan, but rather bordering continues to be an ongoing process. And it takes shape, the shape, and it's far from invariable or settled, the kind of shape or force that it takes in the lives of people who live in the borderlands. And so across chapters of the book, I show how bordering, militarized bordering, what the violence of militarized bordering is, if we turn away from a kind of focus on the fence alone and examine how people who live in these border areas come to experience the force and effect, the sort of what bordering means in different domains of their life. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is the way in which, and this is sort of central to the argument of the book, is that gender and sexuality are not simply gendered bodies, sexualized bodies don't simply feel the effects of bordering, right? So, gendered, but rather gender and sexuality is foundational to the way in which mobility and security come to be related to one another through bordering. In other words, it is through bordering that certain mobilities are deemed to be threats to national security and others are not. And gender and heteronormative relations are at the heart of this kind of figuring out and placing and policing of what gendered mobilities are permissible and what are not, right? And so I'll talk about very much the way in which the policing of young men, and we're familiar with this in our contemporary political discourse in India, certainly, but more widely across the region, around the figure of the illegal migrant, right? So migrant illegality, one of the big sort of sensational, very vexed political discourses of our times is that the Indian border needs to be militarized. There's a consensus, there's a popular consensus around militarizing and closing its border with Bangladesh because of the kind of figure of the threatening figure embodied in the Bangladeshi Muslim male, right? And so it's figured in the threat of the illegal migrant is embodied and figured in a very particular way. In the, as I take you to the borderlands, I want to talk about the way in which such a discourse takes shape and lives in a very dynamic way across India and Bangladesh, right? So it's not simply a discourse that's kind of limited to the Indian territorial Indian territory, but it takes shape. It sort of has a life of its own. The state targets state security regimes of India and Bangladesh, target particular figurations of threat. And I show that it's very much that, young men who come of age in the borderlands very much bear, and in this region where I do fieldwork and where I write about, they are predominantly Muslim and Rajbangshi communities. Pretty much evenly distributed on the Indian side in the district of Cooch Behar, and Rajbangshis being in a minority with overwhelming Muslim majority on the Lalmonirhat and Kurigram districts on the Bangladesh side. So what happens? Let me read a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about the way in which policing in the borderlands occurs through criminalization of space. So first, the criminalization of borderlands as lawless spaces and criminal havens. In India and Bangladesh, this imaginary is evident in media discourses and mainstream social perceptions. This type of narrative is especially common among those who related to the borderlands on both sides, right? With both Indian and Bangladeshi sides from the national security perspective. But this was equally rife amongst, sort of social peers. So, for instance, I would hear in Bangladesh that college students in hostels, so from college students from these villages, border villages, in hostels in Lalmonirhat and Rangpur, sort of bigger towns inward, would be mocked if their friends found out that they were from border villages. I frequently witnessed residents being asked about their hidden wealth, assumed to be smugglers or criminals, by co-passengers in public transportation, when their final destination is revealed to be one of the border villages, right? So this criminalizing imaginary, this assumption of the borderlands as a, space rife with criminality, and all of those who reside there, therefore associated with the border businesses, political economy of the border and the illicit economies, was acutely present among border security and law enforcement agents posted in the borderlands on both sides. Often the way in which this plays out in everyday experience for residents is that the assumption is that because this is a criminalized space, all those who have a chance to migrate away and are not interested in being involved in the borders economies will do so. So therefore, by that kind of logic, all those who remain are assumed to be somehow tainted and associated with the borders economies, right? So, there's a kind of theory of spoiling that I quote several of the Indian BSF, the Border Security Force officers, kind of espousing, which is that by which they shift blame onto the space of the borderlands itself, right? That whoever stays here gets spoiled, gets involved. And therefore, the only way for people, for young men especially, to be respectable, and this is where kind of heteronormative expectations and pressures are really key, because both socially and in terms of the security state, the expectation is for young men to very quickly become a productive, and a marker of proper masculinity is this kind of productive masculinity where you grow up and you're able to earn to support a household, marry and continue to support and reproduce a household, right? So it's those pressures of productive masculinity is very much the lens through which young men who remain and are associated, whether in agrarian work or other kinds of labor or do invest in and are associated with the borders economies, they're judged through that as a kind of opposition to being a kind of successful, productive man, respectable, right? So respectability for the work, even if one is earning through the borders businesses, it doesn't bring with it the kind of respectability that would give them the status needed to be seen as a productive man come of age. Alongside the criminalization of space, as I mentioned, as I'm kind of the links I'm drawing is that the criminalization of space endorses a targeting of the young women, of the young men who are then found to be in the borderlands, right? So, after Bihar, Bengal is one of the, in India, Bengal has a huge number of migrants away from the state, rural migrants away from the state to various parts of India. And this figure of the illegal migrant coming from Bangladesh, the Bengali Muslim man. Certainly there are, circular migrants from Bangladesh coming to work in various parts of India in construction and manufacturing. And so that kind of mobility, so you see, sort of cross-border movement of people and goods is deeply criminalized for young men, but mobility away into cities or urban, industries, whether in Bangladesh or in India, so garments and construction or even seasonal farm work in other parts of Bangladesh, and all of the same in India, that kind of mobility of, that kind of hard toil of labor migration is valorized as the proper kind of mobility for young men to aspire to, right? So that's the heteronormative ideal set up with the criminalization of the space of the borderlands. And what this does is then target young men in a very particular way and construct men who remain in the borderlands as deviant, right? As exhibiting a kind of deviant masculinity that doesn't, which is not to say that they're idle, but whatever work they're engaged in, even if it earns them money, is criminalized en masse. Partly because of the illegality, the clandestine nature of the manner in which the state sees border economies as clandestine, but because also of this kind of association that I've just pointed out. And I want to read for you a short portrait of the, if in India, the big figure is that of the illegal migrant. In Bangladesh, there's a huge concern around drugs and drug addiction. And Fencidal, an Indian cough syrup, sold over the counter in India, but is the substance of greatest abuse in Bangladesh, is of tremendous anxiety and concern in Bangladesh. And it comes into Bangladesh sort of literally, of course, you're all familiar in the audience with the map of India and Bangladesh. So, Bangladesh is surrounded on all three sides literally by India. And so the kind of national anxiety at the level of the body politic, right, in Bangladesh, is that of this drug pouring in from all sides into the country and attacking, especially its youth with addiction. So its youth are not only, the young men are not only, so the borderlands are the vulnerable site from which the nation is kind of, attacked or made vulnerable with the flow and seeping in of drugs. But youth are simultaneously dangerous criminals and vulnerable, right? Male youth, young men. They're simultaneously the criminals and the smugglers, but also the vulnerable ones becoming addicted. And therefore the nations, what the World Bank designates as the nation's greatest resource being its labor potential, its youth, therefore being corrupted and diminished by this kind of addiction. And so I'll give you a very short, quick portrait of a kind of policing campaign in the border district of Lalmonirhat by the district police. as I'm saying, in a context, and I've just tried to set out that broader context for you, where in Bangladesh, discourses of contagion and criminality are manifest not in very general terms, but in very, very particular gendered categories. And they encourage gendered categories of intervention as well, right? So, if and I want us to think about this in a way analogous to, let's say, the self-help group movement has specifically targeted women's empowerment, right? Women's self-help groups. So similarly, this kind of criminality, contagion, policing produces a very gendered category of intervention, of vulnerability and danger in that of the young man, in the young borderland man. On a particular day in northern Bangladesh, I was accompanying the superintendent of the police in this borderline district to a school which was part of a drive to reform vulnerable youth, in which the district police was reaching out to students in high schools, colleges, and madrasas. I quote, a 15-year-old girl boldly, raises her hand and asks the SP, there are a lot of drug addicts in our society, and there are a lot of drug sellers in these borderlands. How do we stop them? To the hall full of, on that afternoon, to a hall full of about 100 14 to 18-year-old schoolgirls, the SP described a familiar type of a deviant man, a social miscreant. He used the term in Bengali, the bokhate chele, or the corrupted male youth. And I quote him. He resembles a dog with heavy chains and bracelets around his neck and wrists. He has streaks of color in his spiky gelled hair, cigarette in his fingers, or dangling out of the corner of his mouth as he stands leaning sideways, fashionably. That's the bokhate chele, standing right outside your school on your route back home, trying to impress you. They usually take drugs. Often they have drugs on them, selling them. I usually beat them up when I catch them. After that, sending them to court only means that they will get out on bail or by giving money. So I shame them. Sometimes I even call their parents and shame them and their parents together. So he went on to boast about how his team instructed to show no mercy towards such bokhate chele, such corrupted youth, what their kind of record had been in terms of picking them up. And he appealed to these, young women, these young adult girls, to fix their surveilling gaze upon their peers, brothers, and neighbors in this criminalizing fashion. His contention was that they would have to be reformed with deterring violence if necessary. And this kind of language and figuration of threat and reform, violent reform, very, very strongly echoes counterparts in India, right? So the Indian BSF, I describe in the book, has very similar, not just in Bengal, but in other borderlands across the country. But here, very particularly targeting the, male Muslim and low caste male bodies as needing policing and reform. And that policing comes in the form of this violent reforming of deviant masculinity. And this invitation, and it comes with this, and I want us to note, and this is important for us understanding and discussing state-society relations, that policing, militarized bordering in contemporary South Asia, and certainly in these borderlands, is not an imposition of an already formed set of security practices upon local residents, but rather policing practices emerge out of locally resonant gendered norms and ideas. And it invites, in this very short quote that I described, it very explicitly invites vigilant citizenship. It conscripts citizens to participate in policing of certain mobilities and certain kinds of threats, gendered threats, right? Very explicitly. And this is, this is not one side or the other, but this is a shared kind of policing practice of criminality, gendered criminality, and threat and kind of threatening mobilities on both sides of the borderlands. And I'll end with making just a final point, which is that we would be remiss if we stopped in our analysis about how the state polices um, uh, of reading these practices as policing of as accomplishing the work of policing young men in the borderlands alone. The final point I want to make is that these kinds of policing interventions, and there's a host of other examples. It's these kinds of young men who live in the borderlands, but it's also that of seized goods. So in Bangladesh, Indian ganja is kind of seized. The anxieties around drugs are both this fentanyl as corrupting youth, but also ganja, Indian ganja, grown exclusively as as Indian farmers will tell you, exclusively as an export product, they would joke, for Bangladesh. And so there's a tremendous amount of anxiety around these kinds of drugs coming, crossing borders in either direction, right? And the final point I want to make is draw attention to the work this policing does in gendering and sexualizing the states themselves, right? So how states come to be, it's not just that states target bodies, as they very clearly do in gendered ways in these borderland areas, but through such policing practices, the states of India and Bangladesh come to, be gendered and sexualized in relation to one another in a very particular way. And I'll just say one last thing about that before I end, which is that as the Bangladeshi state, so very common practice, and I have more detail on this in my book. Acts of seizure by both the BSF and the Bangladeshi, the BGB and the police are displayed on social media, right? So they'll take a seized fentanyl or seized drugs, vehicles, the people, the men transporting them, the act of crime, the scene of crime is pictured and displayed across various social media handles, Facebook and Twitter being the most common, widespread. And there's a very kind of standard choreography of the way in which this image is displayed, right? So there'll be like the date, the amount of the volume of the goods, the worth, monetary worth, and very specific kind of nationalizing commentary. So Indian ganja in Bangladeshi territory, right? So in a way that dramatizes, it spatializes, it it kind of classifies the commodity being out of place in a particular in Bangladeshi both territory and economy, right? And I argue that there is a distinctive gendered aspect to the status self-fashioning. India's border security regime, guarding against the threat of Bangladeshi mobilities, genders these bodies and goods as masculine aggressors, right? So the language very much is that this is a kind of aggressive male threat against which, what that justifies equally aggressive macho masculinist security regime. Muscular Hindu nationalism in its border security avatar is to cut such threats down to size. And bilateral ties very much hinge on an unequal relation. And there is, tremendous discontent and unease about this in domestic politics in Bangladesh. For the Bangladeshi state, picturing seized Indian ganja creates a visual template for the Bangladeshi police and border guards to claim a militarized masculinity for themselves in the role of a protector state and to be recognized as such for their citizenry. So it's as much a performance to their domestic publics that, we too are at work in the borderlands in this militarized masculine capacity. Right? And so we see how the Indian and Bangladeshi states' presence in the borderlands serves to gender themselves in relation to one another as they perform their roles very clearly in relation to both the borderland publics whom they police and target, but also wider domestic publics to which they address themselves. And that's where I'm about to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahana. It was just wonderful listening to you, and firstly, heartiest congratulations on the degree to which you have gone into exploring this issue on your book. I think it's fascinating. I learned really an enormous amount from the understanding that you took us through. And on that sort of a very, I would say, very high bar that you have set, I now take the opportunity, and it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Sneha to make her presentation, please. Sneha, over to you.
I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to
Go
share
ahead.
my screen because unlike Shahana, I'm not a very charismatic speaker, so I'll have to take recourse to some visual aids. All right. I'm just going to make sure this works. All right. So today I'll be speaking about a part of my book project, which is titled Moving Targets, and it's on traffic rules, state authority and urban citizenship in India. It's an ethnographic exploration of state experiments, the traffic authority, and the tactile, bumpy, painful, and pleasurable experiences of driving in an Indian metropolis. So in the book, I take the practical experience of driving as well as its governance and regulation as a window to think about urban life in India, and I situate my work in the southern Indian metropolis of Hyderabad. So the book is kind of inspired by, wanting to think through this Orientalist tragicomic stereotype about roads in India and driving in India. So these three memes kind of sum up the kinds of conversations around, what driving in India is like, how people treat traffic rules as mere suggestions, and how there's a certain cultural, intimate pride almost in the breaking of traffic rules, and the fact that, you really have to be an expert to navigate the kind of what Tarini Bedi, the anthropologist, calls gadbad in India, the specific tactile expertise that you need to do so. So I situate my work in trying to unearth or scratch the surface of that narrative, while also thinking seriously about the ways in which state officials, such as here, there's a picture from a photography campaign conducted by the Hyderabad Traffic Police in 1998, where, it's really clear how they're linking law breaking to nation building, right? So there was this palpable anxiety around how the figure of the unruly driver, very often indexed as male, working class, is sort of emblematic of how and why India is lagging behind in the aesthetics of trying to be a developed country, right? Meanwhile, there's also a much more policy-driven, medicalized conversation around road safety, and how, while all of this cultural quirkiness might be fun to talk about, is actually resulting in high rates of deaths and injuries on the road. So there is that medicalized narrative as well. So in the book, I try to weave together these three meta-narratives into really understanding how is it that road traffic is actually felt and experienced. So why is road traffic and its management so vexing to policymakers, state officials, and citizens? And really, how are efforts at changing driving behavior shaping state-citizen relations in India? So much like Shahana's work as well, my work tries to understand what's going on in the state-society relations at large, taking the specific case of, say, the borderland or, say, the road, right, as a window to kind of think through those logics of governance. But because my work is situated in an urban region, I also think about how city making as a project, as a collective project, is implicated in these ideas and efforts, because the volume of traffic in Indian cities has been increasing steadily in the past couple of decades, especially post-liberalization in the early 1990s. There is a growing anxiety around world-class cities and what those entail. So in terms of spectacular infrastructure such as expressways, flyovers, we're also coming up with alternative options like metro rail, right? The symbol of so-called urban modernity. Then there is much more technological modernization of traffic law enforcement in urban areas, which results in asking interesting questions about what that's doing to, say, state legibility, right? And surveillance. And a vocal urban middle class. Much literature has been devoted to thinking about how and why the urban middle class in India feels a certain sense of, I guess, for the lack of a better word, entitlement in, making these cities appear and function a particular way. So my work sits at the intersection of these sorts of concerns. It's born out of a little more than 18 months of multi-sited ethnographic fieldwork, primarily in 17 to 20, with some visits done since. observations field notes, semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and interpretive analysis of news media. So by that, I simply mean I spent a lot of time with traffic police officials on the road as they were doing the work of traffic policing. I attended training sessions where traffic police were trained to regulate traffic, to understand what they're looking out for in terms of like how do they diagnose unruliness, right? Also attended a lot of road safety awareness campaigns being conducted by the traffic police. I spent a lot of time with motorists of various social classes. So auto rickshaw drivers here, two-wheeler drivers, car drivers. I learned to drive as part of my fieldwork because I didn't know how to drive and I didn't have a license. So I had to learn to drive and also apply for a license. I can speak a little more about that later. I spent some time with local NGOs working on road safety. So did a bunch of educational awareness campaigns with them to get a sense of, again, an insight into what the so-called vocal middle class really cares about. And I also tracked interpretively news and social media that came up, ethnographically. By this, I mean that I didn't do like big data analysis or content analysis. Instead, I sort of tracked the news items that were forwarded to me by my interlocutor. So that is the kind of selection mechanism I adopted rather than doing something more, I guess, in quotes, objective, right? So coming back to aesthetics of authority, this particular chapter is about smart policing, unruly citizens, and the politics of visibility when it comes to traffic policing in Hyderabad. I speak to primarily two sets of literature here. One is the one on policing and state power, in which police have been cast as agents of state violence or the entity of state power that has legitimate use of force in a given territory, right? And there's a lot of writing on excessive policing and excessive incarceration and the kind of racialized, caste-based, religious bias, gendered bias in policing. And there's also a bunch of literature on the effects of urban marginality and how excessive policing exacerbates urban inequality. On the other hand, there's more recent work on technological advancement of policing, especially on smart policing and surveillance, which really answers the questions: how are populations becoming legible to the state? How is technology and smart policing amplifying this particular legibility? And issues with the collection and storage of sensitive data. In particular, Srinivas Kodali, an independent researcher in Hyderabad, has been doing phenomenal work in critiquing systems like, say, Aadhaar, but also the increase of CCTV camera installations in Hyderabad and the privacy problems with all of that. So for instance, here you have the first image, the one on the left, is of a man being randomly stopped by Hyderabad police, and they're taking a picture of his face, which will go into a big database, right? And this is to advance facial recognition technologies as part of their counter-terrorism kind of efforts. And to the right, you see this command control center, which has been inaugurated in Hyderabad. And it's the commissioner of Hyderabad is essentially saying it's Hyderabad's third eye. It has like a whole, counter-terrorism cell, and there's a lot of CCTV. Approximately 10 lakh is the plan by next year to be all connected to this command and control center. Now, my point is that when I was doing fieldwork, there was a lot of euphoria around the fact that there's a command and control center in Hyderabad and it looks like this, that it looks modern, that it looks awe-inspiring, that, Hyderabad with its high-tech sort of branding is going to have a high-tech policing system, right? So unlike the kind of caution, say, researchers are very rightfully pointing out that there needs to be much more work on data privacy, for many of my interlocutors, and this was true across social classes, there was certain excitement about the fact that we finally have a police, like the command and control center looks like this. It looks like it could belong in Singapore, as one of my interlocutors put it, right? So this constant comparison with Singapore kept coming up as Hyderabad wants to catapult towards a certain kind of technological, futuristic sort of aesthetics, right? But for my interlocutors in the traffic police department, while all this was happening, all this technological charisma, euphoria going on, they were much more concerned with something very, very basic. They were just like, how do we get people to follow traffic rules, right? So should we persuade them or should we punish them? Which would be a better strategy to discipline drivers on the roads? And they often made very direct analogies with parenting. So one of the things that kept coming up was, well, should you be very strict with children, but then they don't understand the value of rules. So you should actually educate them about the value of rules, and then they'll follow these rules on their own. So there was a very direct infantilization of the average Indian driver, right? Very often, again, class would come up as in, like, a lot of traffic police officers would tell me, illiterate people, they shouldn't be fined because it's a classist mechanism of penalties, but they really have to be told how to think and what to do about safety because they don't quite understand it themselves. Very contrary to the drivers I spoke, who were actually very well aware of what they understood by safety and how they interpreted risk, right? But this persuade or punish kind of dilemma kept coming up during policing. And in that regard, technology actually appeared as a fix. So it appeared to resolve the certain tension between this dilemma of whether we should persuade or whether we should punish. And this was summed up by the Additional Commissioner of Traffic in Hyderabad in 2018 to me when he said, smart cities need smart police, but they also need friendly police. So friendliness actually came up as an affective mode in which they could resolve this tension between persuading or punishing. Because, as again, coming back to the analogy with parenting, if you talk to your child like a friend, they're more likely to listen to you. And what does this have to do with technology? I'll come to it just now. So the same Additional Commissioner of Traffic told me that we need to change the image the public has when they think of an average traffic policeman. Right now, they think of a lathi-wielding, uneducated, rude and aggressive, pot-bellied, and uncouth fellow who's after their money. What we need is a tech-savvy, sophisticated, and fit police force with Bluetooth speakers in their ears and sleek tabs in their hands. Hyderabad says it's a high-tech city, so the police also have to become high-tech. The image of the police needs to be such that the public will automatically want to obey, right? So eliciting a certain kind of obedience based on the aesthetics of the average traffic policeman kept coming up, and technology was often seen as a certain kind of legibilizing or legitimizing sort of fix there. And this sort of anxiety around the aesthetics of the average traffic policeman was not actually unfounded. For instance, in 2014, the controversial writer Manu Joseph had a piece in the New York Times in which he says, the face of the government, the cops, elicit no respect, not just because of their reputation, but also because of how they look. Their cheap uniforms and how they wear those uniforms, how they sit on the roadside on plastic chairs, their large paunches like babies on their laps, and how 6 of them hide under flyovers to pounce on motorists in the great game that is the Indian daily life, right? So I heard similar kinds of anxieties around what the police were being perceived as by the general public. So these also came up with regard to police officers, like the police stations. So in the first one, it's an inspector that I was speaking to. He said, it must be common for you to see this kind of government office. And it was a renovated government office that we were in America. But even having air conditioning and proper infrastructure for police is a new thing. Have you seen the SR Nagar traffic police station? It's operating out of a tin shed. And it really was operating out of a tin shed when I was there. And the Nallakunta one, it's in an old building that is on the verge of collapse. Imagine a police station that looks like a poor man's shack. It happens only in India. Again, a culturally intimate moment of humor there, right? Then the second quote is by a constable, and he said, the public should see a station and feel respect. Or if the public feels that we are too broke to even have air conditioning, why will they take us seriously? This is the main reason why people follow rules in malls and spit in government offices, right? Finally, traffic police as being service provision was yet another angle to think about this aesthetic problem, right? We want to communicate an image to the public. This is again the Additional Commissioner of Traffic Police who's telling me that we are not the old kind of police, we're the new police. We are service providers. We provide the service of safe roads, ordered traffic, quick and easy movement in the city. With technology, all this is easier. Have you seen all the gadgets traffic police have now? Body-worn cameras, galaxy tabs, PDAs, laser guns. The thing is that these gadgets are not just helpful for policing, but they're also changing the way people look at us, right? So it was which is why I kind of titled this chapter Anxieties of Authority, because I'm constantly thinking about what is their public image, right? So it is about state legibility in that technology does enhance it, but they're also equally worried about how they are seen. So it's the state, it's how the state sees is something that a lot of literature has been talking about, but how it wants to be seen or how what wants to be perceived kept coming up as something my interlocutors are worried about. So I'll quickly run through a particular case of body-worn cameras I've introduced in Hyderabad amongst the traffic police in 2015. So the original intention of body-worn cameras was, of course, to police the police, right? So here you have the top IPS officers, and here you have the upper subordinates and lower subordinates. And essentially, it was the lower and upper subordinates that were really concerned about the image of the average traffic policeman, because the officer ranks, or the one person, the IPS officers, are never quite perceived as illiterate, pot-bellied, uncouth, or anything. The kind of class-caste dynamics of the police force itself, because it's a colonial era structure, is deeply hierarchical. And so it's actually the upper and lower subordinates who are, in a way, the face of the government, who are seen at street corners, that were constantly worried about their image. Also because they were known to be very, very corrupt, right, in public discourse. So this body-worn cameras came up as a solution to kind of surveil the upper and lower subordinates, because there were a lot of allegations of bribery and corruption amongst the lower ranks, right? But for the same lower subordinates and constabulary that I was hanging out with, for them, it was actually useful because they felt like the body-worn camera is like a mirror in which society can see how uncivilized it behaves with our constables. They see this footage and they feel bad for us because they finally see how the police look scared of public. Does it happen in any other country? You tell me. And yet we are told to be friendly police. Our IPS officers who tell us to be friendly have no idea of what we face every day. So the everyday traffic policeman would constantly tell me of all of the moments of encounter, of heated encounter with motorists where they got yelled at, or where people refused to follow traffic rules, or people refused to pay their tickets, or some such. So they were very keen on actually adopting body-worn cameras, because for them it became a mechanism to collect video evidence of all the time citizens are behaving, in quotes, unruly with them, right? This is not to say that was all the time. Like, I'm sure there were lots of instances where the police were also engaging in excessive violence, but obviously they were not collecting that footage. They were more interested in the other narrative, right? So here you have two instances in which you had two young Muslim women in old city of Hyderabad that is over policed and has a certain like narrative of really housing the most unruliest of drivers in Hyderabad. And I used quotes because all of these are, of course, very well entrenched stereotypical narratives. But in both these cases, what happened was that these women were stopped by the police for driving either without a helmet or regular checking of license or some such. But in both cases, the women started having an argument with the traffic cop. Now, the thing is, this happens all the time. But in both these instances, this argument was filmed and was prolonged for a long time. And this prolonged footage of the woman shouting at the cop not saying anything, not reacting, just filming more and more of the, manufactured in quotes hysteria, was then leaked to news media by the police, right? And so these videos went viral. And I had a lot of my interlocutors sending me these videos saying, see, we told you, people in old city, especially women of old city, are dangerous. They don't treat us with any respect. They are very, very difficult to govern. And that's the topic of this roundtable. And so the careful construction of unruliness, I argue, was made possible by technology that was actually supposed to police the police, right? So here you have the production of the unruly citizen happening through body-worn camera footage, and that because the police is able to control the narrative on social media, is able to leak it to all these news media channels. And both these news items are actually sent to me by my dissertation committee members in the US. So it kind of went that viral. It made news even in, on Facebook, perhaps is where they found it. But it really kept coming back. And the production of the figure of the unruly citizen on the body of a young Muslim woman is really important in the context of rising differences between religious communities, even in a place like Hyderabad that's otherwise known to be pretty syncretic. And the reason I say that is under comment section of both these viral videos, there was a lot of Islamophobic language, right? Around how like Muslims are the problems, they are the bad drivers, they are the real unruly drivers in Hyderabad, and so on and so forth. And absolutely, obviously, unverifiable comments, but there were a lot of those. At the same time, there's no one unruly citizen figure. Here, you have someone who was driving a luxury car that was stopped during a drinking driving checking by the Hyderabad police in 2018, and he got out of the car and started yelling at the cops, saying that he's connected to the chief minister's daughter. So he has this like elite connection, and he's showing them his phone to show that I have this chief minister's daughter is on my phone. She's my contact. And then he starts shaming the police, the constables, for not knowing the spelling of English words like government, psychology. And he says, you can't even spell government. How can you stop me? You have no authority to stop me because you can't even spell psychology. So the police use this video again to their advantage and pointing out how the elite also give them a really, really hard time on the roads and shame them for belonging to certain class status, right? In both cases, this body-worn camera footage and other digital camera that they were holding became really, really important. So the mantra that an inspector really nicely summed it up for me, he said, our principle now is record, don't react. Because if you react, then you go viral on social media. But if you record, then you can control the narrative, right? Similarly, police now use digicams for non-contact enforcement because of these rising cases of heated encounters. So now they're using digital cameras to take pictures of offensive, of rule disobedience on the roads, and they send traffic ticket digitally to the person, to their phone or address on their driving license, right? So they've been harnessing technology for enforcing traffic rules. That's the official line. But they also do this, where sometimes they catch motorists for unpaid traffic tickets. And if the traffic tickets are a lot, you generate a long serpentine list of traffic challans, right? And they make the motorists pose with them. And this is called snake challan. So they're able to kind of stand with these long receipts, and then they post them on social media to say, look, we are so vexed by this public that does not follow rules, but also doesn't pay tickets, and they're holding up snake challans, right? And finally, one third way in which they're trying to control, or they were trying to control the narrative of traffic police as being friendly police is through the use of memes and through the use of jokes on their social media pages, right? So here you have this meme. It says, Hyderabad, Ekkada is, where is Hyderabad? Hyderabad is here. Where is Facebook? Facebook is here. Hyderabad traffic police page is here in my heart, right? And this actually happened because there was this really popular administrator of the page called Admin H. His name was Admin Hari Krishna. And he was very well known for his witty humor in 2017. So here you have a picture of someone, I die like real men, no helmet. And he says, we are extremely sorry, Mr. Krishna Reddy, sir. We won't let you die. We will see that you live like real men. Please wear helmet and ride. Or you have, drive safe, Mr. Late Biker is better than late Mr. Biker. Admin H. He'd always sign off with an Admin H. Or here you say, drink beer, you'll escape like a deer, and we catch you like a cheetah. Like, all these like bantery sorts of jokes. Or the moment when we escaped from traffic police being this, and when you got caught on the next signal. So Admin H was this like raging, funny police sort of emblem, embodying the kind of funny policing image that the traffic police were very keen on having in 2017. Unfortunately, what happened is that he got removed in 2018, and that actually resulted in a lot of citizens using hashtags, hashtag bring back admin H on the traffic police page with comments like, it's a shame on your department, why would anyone remove admin H? It's the only reason anyone started giving shit to your page. Even 1 star is waste for this page without admin H. Without Harinath Anna, this page is like India team in 1990s without Sachin. So it went on, and the page rating went from 4.7 out of 5 to 3.5 in a matter of 2 days because there was a boycott Hyderabad traffic police. So in this case, the friendly policing image that they were trying to craft on social media actually went a little bit out of control, with apparently there being a lot of jealousy around admin H within the department, and then some top cops like transferred him from that position, and that resulted in a whole other sort of unanticipated so-called digital revolution against Hyderabad traffic police page, and it's really not been as funny since. But anyway, I conclude now, and I wanted to conclude with a couple of thoughts. Just that, one, producing the kind of smart or friendly traffic police in Hyderabad is always contingent on the production of an unruly citizen, right? And what that unruly citizen is and who that is kind of changes from context to context and time to time, but there is a certain pattern. And a focus on aesthetics and the image of authority, rather than a sole focus on legibility and state power alone, could actually yield in very interesting ways to think about how the face of authority is changing. How do traffic police themselves perceive their authority, and what are they trying to do about their legitimacy, and how do we understand obedience in that context? So yeah, I land here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sneha. It was fantastic, and I must say that we have had such such a depth and diverse understanding of the subject that we are dealing today from the 2 presentations that we have seen till now. First, Shahana's take on the border policing and how the gender element is dovetailed into its stereotypicity, and then Sneha, the way you outline the way the state as a manager of traffic and its governance is engaging with the citizens. I think it's absolutely fascinating. We have unfortunately not been able to hear Dr. Darini on this panel. She's not well and couldn't join us here today. But let me, for the benefit of the participants who are here, let me just read out the abstract that Darini was to present on. And I'm sure that when ISAS brings out the compilation of the papers, Darini's paper will figure prominently in that. So what Darini was going to speak on in terms of the abstract is like this, that prohibition remains as, if not more, contested in contemporary India as it was in the colonial period. And while practical considerations of economic viability continue to be offered by the policy's critics by way of demanding its suspension in states that are within, quote, dry states, or in resisting its reintroduction in states that have eschewed the policy as better suited for a vaguely defined distant future. The state's attempts to reform bodies through policy interventions continues to elicit all sorts of resistance by bodies that refuse to become sober by law. And this really would have been a fascinating element of discussion so far as prohibiting alcohol and the way the state policies have engaged in this on citizens. And the paper that Darini was to share with us draws upon three seminal debates from Prohibition's introduction in colonial India. Debates that in different ways continue to exert certain pressures on policymakers to unpack the difficulties involved in prohibition's enforcement. And these are namely the right to a livelihood, the right to freedom of religious worship, and finally the right to freedom of movement. So all three rights, in a sense, intersect with each other in their outlining of the policy approach and outlook. And the paper presents a close reading of these historical debates alongside their contemporary parallels by way of elucidating how bodies have historically resisted becoming co-opted into the state's reformist programs. And it also sheds light on how the state's attempts to intervene in the bodies of its citizens continue to be resisted on various grounds, including on the basis of religion, culture, and tradition, the economy, and the democratic state's own responsibility for upholding fundamental civil liberties. So this was Darini's abstract for the paper that she has been working and preparing for us. What I would request at this point in time now is that we have heard two brilliant presentations, and of course, I had the pleasure of reading out Darini's abstract as well, while she's not there with us. But if there are any questions that the participants would like to raise, I'm sure maybe either Shahana or Sneha will have some comments to offer on that. So with that, let me just take the opportunity now of checking the questions that have come up. And I see that we already have 4 up there on the Q&A box. And since we are towards the last part of the RT now, let me start by taking the first 2 questions. Shahana, I suppose these both would connect to you. The first is, I would like to know how much or in what ways does majoritarianism and identity politics of Hindutva impact the politics of surveillance and border policing? And the second is, how have intergenerational perspectives evolved with regard to all this? So may I request Shahana to respond to these, please?
Sure, thank you. The first question is very, very important one, of course. And I've seen that shift, I'll say a few things about that question about the majoritarian Hindutva shift towards Hindutva politics in the borderlands. So, I've been doing field work in the region I write about from 2011. So, over the course of this a bit more than a decade, I've definitely seen the way in which 2 terms of the current government has impacted the kind of ground experience of border policing and practice. And I'll give you, a couple examples. So one, that said, I should say that while it's become more stringent, and in particular directed towards cattle smuggling. So cattle smuggling, is perhaps the most organized, the biggest kind of volume of cross-border trade at this border. And while clearly, and all soldiers and officers in the BSF, say this, that there is very clear instructions from high up that they are to be, this is their top priority. And so that is a very, very clear shift in terms of the way in which the BSF is held up responsible, right, to be answerable and accountable for smuggling, for cattle smuggling, to stop cattle smuggling at this border. While that is definitely a clear shift, I should, note that border policing and surveillance along this border has been a bipartisan political issue in India, regardless of what political party has been in power, there has been an increasing investment. That has not been something that has been, there's been a kind of difference in policy opinion. And, and while the kind of definitely majoritarian shift in Islamophobia manifests in a particular way, suspicion towards all, as I was saying, right, like the criminalizing, and this is something that I think it's important to very carefully document, that the way in which criminalizing of borderland residents cuts across religious and caste identities, with some measure of protection in relation to, who can be citizens and who are seen as, who are seen as refugees, and what kinds of migrants are seen as illegal, as migrants, and who can be seen as refugees. But that I have not talked about today, so I don't want to go into talking about that at the moment. The second question about, to the question, there's much more to be said, of course, about how majoritarianism plays out. But as I said, I'll try to stick to policing of men and criminalizing of young men in the borderlands, because that's what I've spoken about with my examples. Intergenerational perspectives evolved with regard to borders is a great and a very big question. I would say read my book, because there are several chapters which literally deal with, I trace family histories over generation of living in the borderlands, and how they experience and tell the biography of the border, in a way from the perspective of the borderland family, in ways that are quite different from the standard political history we are told of the border on either side, right? That's sort of family histories of migration, kinship relations, the ways in which marriages change over generations. There's a chapter that traces that very in great detail. Again, back to what I spoke about today in terms of the targeting of masculinity and male mobility. I think it's been a growing, it's not very new in the sense that, and this is a point I often make when I speak about the NRC and CAA and the contemporary sensationalism and discussion around migrant illegality, that in the borderlands, these anxieties and this kind of surveillance in trying to intercept the infiltrator or the foreigner from the bona fide citizen has long been in play. And so one of to give a small example of a kind of generate now an embodied way in which an intergenerational memory kind of archives policing is, I heard a lot of, when I would ask residents to tell me how they remember, like when did the fence come up, or when do they remember policing practices being really prominent, right? So a story I heard often, a reference I heard often is men would say, would refer to a particular period in their lives or a particular local political event to talk about that. That is when they started walking around with, and, using this phrase, book pocket ID card niye ghora. So book, the shirt with a chest pocket is a very male garment, right? So men remember walking around, starting to need walking around with an ID card, being the voter identity card. And that period can be very clearly traced to what was called the Seshan effect, right? When T.N. Seshan was the election commissioner. And so instead of that kind of, it's a very embodied memory of when people's mobilities within the borderlands started to be policed, and people had to had to be intercepted and frisked and produce ID documents upon inspection, right? So that's a older memory of this kind of policing practice. I can stop there.
Thank you, Shahana. Thank you so much. Let me now move on to the remaining questions. And I think this next bunch is probably all for Sneha, but for the benefit of the participants who are not able to see the questions, I'll just briefly read this out. So the first question is, where do the pedestrians stand as far as road safety is concerned? What about implementation of road safety measures as recommended by the Supreme Court of India Committee on Road Safety, and have black spots been identified? And the same gentleman also checks whether traffic architecture modernized and technologically synchronized with the police control room, how much the traffic police are sensitized and trained in enforcing traffic rules. We have a comment that has come in after these two questions, and the comment is shifting the context, going to Sri Lanka. And this alludes to the point when Sri Lanka had an episode of state-driven garbage control that looks like it was fairly prominently interventionist. And when someone dropped garbage in the wrong place, the military would be used to return the garbage to their house for them, and would be shown on the television as well. So the use of shame as a governing tool, as a weaponizing tool. Are there instances of such tools that can be thought of in similar parallel case studies? And finally, Sneha, the field work that you have done sounds fascinating. I'm wondering if there are any alternative visions of policing that you came across. We often see digitalization as a naturally accepted track of progress in various domains of public policy and in policing as well. So, Sneha, we are kind of in the last quarter of this RT. So I guess you will need some time to respond to this. And may I just request you to be, choose your order in which you want to answer these questions. We probably won't get a time to come back and pick up other questions, but let's try to see what best we can do out of this. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you for these questions. I actually get the questions around black spots and road safety a lot. And, again, I should say you'll read my book at some point and maybe much of this will be answered. But pedestrians are the most vulnerable group in any city, right? Pedestrians have the highest number of fatalities, deaths, and they are the most vulnerable. They are the most sidelined in cities like Hyderabad, Bangalore, and other cities that already did not have sidewalks and are now building flyovers upon flyovers, which basically have no capacity for pedestrians. So there's a lot of organizing around that. Absolutely. Road safety measures are not fully implemented. In fact, the very speed bump, the Humple speed bump that you see in a lot of Indian roads is itself in violation of engineering constructions around speed bumps. And those are issues that road safety activists, even in Hyderabad, have been doing a wonderful job, documenting, pointing out, filing PILs about, and so on and so forth. Very quickly, all of this, right? The issue around black spots, the issue around engineering, the issue around potholes, speed breakers, all of that came up a lot as a means to kind of counter the state when they raised traffic penalties in the recent Motor Vehicle Amendment Act, right? So when the penalties went up, there was a lot of opposition to the increase in penalties because the counterpoint was, well, you have not. The state itself is in violation of a lot of its own guidelines. So how can it legitimately increase traffic penalties? And so there was a lot of conversation around that. Is the traffic architecture modernized and technologically synchronized? Well, no, not really. And that is, again, a counterpoint that a lot of activists pose, right? That the traffic police is using this technological fix as if everything else is fine, but actually road design is at fault a lot of the times. Dividers and U-turns and traffic lights are not in sync with what one would categorize as safe designing. And so there are lots of issues around that. But my goal as an ethnographer was more to point out the discourse around it rather than, I'm not an engineer or an architect, so it's not that's not something I was looking at in in more objective ways. Around the question on shame and as a weaponizing tool, yeah, absolutely, thank you for pointing this out. I do think that's really well put, shame as a governing tool and weaponizing tool, and that was used very often in Hyderabad as well. One instance came to mind where I accompanied traffic police and road safety activists on this thing that they did, where we stood at intersections, and whenever the light would turn red and there'd be a lot of motorists waiting in line, they would pointedly go to people who are not wearing helmets and give them a flower or a piece of candy. And there was a Telugu local TV crew that was filming this. So essentially, it was a Gandhigiri tactic, again, going back to the reference to a Bollywood film called Lage Raho Munna Bhai, where you induce guilt and use shaming tactics. So even the police kept on bringing up how we shouldn't reward people who are wearing helmets. We should make those who are not wearing them feel very bad by giving them flowers. And so then they would sheepishly smile. And there was actually a guy who was selling helmets right there too. So then they would buy a helmet, right? And often, by the way, they were substandard helmets, to be honest, not very safe, but again, very performative in wearing a helmet to keep up with the rules, but not actually for the sake of safety, right? So yeah, absolutely. Shame was used very often, even with the snake Chalan example. The point of making those photos viral or putting them up on social media was a way to shame people who had unpaid traffic tickets. And okay, the last one is, this is a great question. Alternative visions of policing is something I think the police were also sort of interested in, but they were thinking much more in lines of what's going on, say, in Singapore, for instance. How do we, like, everyone is a cop kind of idea, right? So there was this app that was launched when I was doing field work, wherein you could take a picture of someone who's violating a traffic rule and upload it. And the police would then use that to send them a ticket, right? So community policing was the alternative vision that was most prominently witnessed by me when I was doing field work. And how can people tell on each other, basically, right? Of course, it didn't quite take off, and the police were in fact complaining to me that, well, nobody really uses the app as much, or there are glitches, or when people take pictures, they're not very good quality and then they can't use them. So of course, all these technological issues that came up, but it didn't take root in the way that they had hoped it would. But that was the alternative vision. I'm sorry, I think I forgot to answer, how much is the traffic police sensitized and trained in enforcing? So they do have periodic training sessions in Hyderabad, and even in enforcing traffic rules, they would just pick a few traffic rules to emphasize and to enforce, right? Because the Motor Vehicle Act is quite expansive and the motor vehicle rules are many. But the police are not, they are very practical. They know that there are certain rules that, well, people don't follow because it doesn't make any sense to follow those rules, right? So they are more focused on very visible violations, like not wearing helmets or not wearing seat belts right now, or auto rickshaw drivers not wearing their uniform, or they try to police the deployment of loudspeakers in auto rickshaws, right? That was an ongoing issue when I was there. So what rules to focus on? I think that really depends on the top cop who decides that there are some rules that need to be emphasized over others. And there was a lot of ambiguity in some other ways, like when I was doing fieldwork, electric vehicles had not quite taken off to the extent that they have now. And so people didn't know whether, like, if you're driving an EV, is it a motor vehicle? If it's not a motor vehicle, do they have to wear a helmet? And that kept coming up whenever I was accompanying traffic cops in their patrolling, right? So yeah, I would leave it at that. But there are workshops and training programs periodically, yes.
Thank you so much, Sneha. That again was very illuminating and very, very, I would say, focused. And this is I suspect, an area of conversation where the intersections are becoming so thin and large at the same time, between public policy, between the question of rights, as well as with the broader question of urban governance, that this issue will remain, and particularly with a region, the South Asian region, which is now home to the largest amount of people in the world as a region. And there are there are challenges that are creeping up which are unknown to even the people who are creating the challenges, that perhaps don't even realize the issues that they are going to sort of face and be a part of as they go ahead. I don't see any further questions on the Q&A box, but what I would request both Shahana and Sneha to just come in into is that we can have another 5 minutes of this conversation, because before I return this to Said to do the final conclusion, Shahana, Sneha, quickly in 2 minutes, would you like to say something on this subject again? Kind of your last words on this for the day. Shahana, can I start with you?
Sure. And there's one last question has also popped
Yes,
in.
that's right. Yeah,
Do people
that
identify
that
with
would
an
be
internalized state governing
good.
their
Yeah,
body?
yeah,
Does
yeah.
it become part of popular culture? And I
Right.
think that's a question that could very well be posed to both of us. And just
Yes.
listening to you, Sneha, in this conversation, I'm struck by there are so many resonances in what both you and I are talking about. A couple things that I'll, flag that I would love to continue thinking about and talking more about. One is the what you refer to as community policing, right? So this invitation to, and this, it's, I think across the world, and certainly in different parts of South Asia, we see instances of this kind of neoliberal turn towards not, and other scholars of South Asian state in relation to neoliberalism has also said this, that it's not a reduction or removal of the state, but the kind of continued involvement of the state, but with displacing a lot of the state work onto, or conscripting a lot of citizens into that. And community policing in cities is such a great example of that. But even what I talked about, and that really goes to the, is one way to respond to this question, to the last question: do people identify with an internalized state governing their bodies? In terms of gendered mobilities in the borderlands, absolutely. So for certain mobilities to be positioned as both permissible and respectable and not a threat to national security, there is a consensus around some others being that, right? Namely that of young men involved in border businesses is the most kind of targeted kind of gendered mobility, right? So, and that's it's not, as I was saying, it's not simply a state imposition on borderland societies, but it over years and decades of policing through, there is the social fabric is very much impacted, and people leverage forms of difference in order to relate to policing, right? And that's something, Sneha, I think you are kind of also talking about. And the final thing is shame. I think that runs through this kind of, that's fantastic comment. And both the snake chalan that you talked about, that you pictured, and the scenes of seizure that I referred to, right? The ways in which these are displayed are both attest to the masculinity and the competence, the aesthetic, compose the aesthetic competence of the state, but also in doing that shames, right? So it's a co-constitutive relations, right? It's the state's power to do that, as in Sri Lanka, as in India and Bangladesh, in these very different sites. So I remarked on, it was very striking to me, these resonances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahana. Sneha, your final thoughts?
Sure. Well, my first final thought is that I also think everyone should read Shahana's book. It's beautiful, it's engaging, it's so insightful, and I really enjoyed reading it. So, yeah, that's my first final thought. Buy the book. Well, the second thing, Shahana, when you were speaking, I was also thinking of another similarity between what you were saying and what I was, well, some other stuff in my book project deals with this this co-constitution of being at risk and being risky, right? Like, so even for motorists, especially two-wheeler riders, they're both considered to be at risk because they're very highly vulnerable physically to accidents, but they're also considered to be risky to other forms of motorized driving, right? So they're considered to be risky to pedestrians, for instance. So this risky and at risk sort of relationship, or them coexisting around one particular figure, right, is very interesting. And I think there's something there to be thinking about, like what that does then to say shame as a weaponizing tool or other forms of governing these bodies that display both these qualities of being risky and at risk. And even like similarly, I think the question of the border being both a source of possibility and of peril, right? Similarly, I think mobility itself being a source of possibility, of freedom, of liberation, of pleasure, but also of peril, of speeding, of accident, of violence, of a very corporeal kind, right? So again, those twin paradoxes that I think plague much of the work that both of us are doing. It was quite striking to me. Um, yeah, I think this question of do people identify with an internalized state governing, I completely agree with Shan. I think like the case of community policing is a great example, right? Like when people start to want to be see like the state, right? For instance, even taking that picture of someone not wearing the helmet and driving, it is in a way the state asking you to see like the state, right? So there is a deep identification there in that you can see what laws are worth then getting involved in policing or in instituting or in enacting in public space, right? This question of whether it became a part of popular culture is very interesting to me, because I just recently, last week, presented a paper on how these desires of having a benevolent dictator who can fix the problem of traffic actually came up in Tollywood films, right? So you had one film called Bharat Ane Nenu, played by the superstar Mahesh Babu, which became a big hit. And one of the center points in that film, one of the plot points is that he becomes the chief minister, and the first thing he does is makes like traffic penalties like 100 times their current amount. And then the public is very annoyed and they're very upset. But then they realize the value of this kind of dictatorial measure, and then they are very happy with the fact that they've had this young charismatic chief minister who's decided to fix the problem of traffic, right? So it does actually come up in popular culture. There are many other references in Telugu cinema that in a way make possible something that a lot of my interlocutors were like, it's impossible to fix the problem of traffic in India because it's a chaotic democracy, right? So in the film, you see this vision or this desire for some sort of like Singaporean style, and it can keep coming up, Singapore style sort of penalties being realized. And that was celebrated. At the same time, people knew that it's just a film, it's not actually going to happen in practice, but even to see it in film was important for that vision to somehow play out in terms of the imagery. So yeah.
Thank you, Sneha, again for those insights. And I think we have done remarkably well on time. We have policed the time very well between us. Thank you so much for your cooperation, both Shahana and Sneha. And also, I must thank the panelists for the very engaging questions that were raised today. We all missed Darini, but we hope that we will have an opportunity to engage with her again and her work. So, on my behalf, I am really left to thank you guys both for your excellent presentations. And I really personally learned a lot, and I'm sure that was a similar sentiment that would be echoed by everybody who attended this panel. Said, can I now take the opportunity of handing back the proceedings to you?
Thank you, Dr. Palit. And I will join you in thanking both the panelists today for this really engaging session. And actually, I would extend this to all the scholars who were engaged during the course of the conference. As the MC, I had the privilege of listening to all the sessions very closely, and I would just like to thank everybody who joined us for sharing their really important work with us, and extend my thank to the chairpersons as well, who did a very adept job with navigating the conversations throughout the conference. And thank you to the audience as well for making platforms like these more fruitful and engaging. And we got some really great questions and participations over the course of these 3 days. And finally, in a more self-serving fashion, I would like to congratulate the team here at ISAS for putting together this conference and pulling off a successful conference, I would say. The team was led by Dr. Rajni and included Jordan, Yusuf, Ramita, and all of us worked together to make it happen. So I think with that, I will bid goodbye and hope to see you all next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed, and have a good day, everybody. Take care.